Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum and welcome back in lecture number 32, which is our last lecture. And we are revising our previous lectures, and today we will be revising lecture number 23 to 27. And it covers the subjects of Ijara. And in the previous lectures we covered the topics of Ijara, applications of Islamic finance, that we covered in the form of project financing, working capital financing, import and export financing, things like that, and also the Islamic investment funds that you may remember, like equity funds, Ijara funds, Murabha funds. And then we discussed Sukuk, which is very popular, and also it has some controversies into it, and the Sharia scholars and Sharia boards, they have their different point of views about this type of instrument. And this was our previous lecture. And in today's lecture, we will be discussing the risk, underlying risk in the Islamic financial system, Islamic financial instruments rather. And we will cover the later part of this lecture as well. So first of all, what is risk? We have discussed extensively in our previous lectures when we were discussing the risk underlying Islamic financial instruments. So risk is actually the existence of uncertainty about the future outcomes. So when we are not sure that what is going to occur in the future, because and this is sure that we don't know in the future, but we can cover that risk. We have some instruments, like you may know the word insurance. That insurance is a form where we substitute our uncertainties with some certainties. And the uncertainties can be classified as general and specific. It will be general ignorance. The general risk is that ignorance of any potential outcome. For example, after the investment in stocks of a company, the company goes default. So for the profit purposes, you invested into stocks of a company, but later on that company defaulted, so your investment goes waste. And the specific risk is that when probabilities can be assigned to potential outcomes. When you invest into certain activities and you can assign probabilities that during such and such time period, this is the probability that the stocks will earn higher, and during these times stocks might earn lower. So when you can assign probabilities, that is the specific risk. So the risk is measured by the variability or volatility of outcomes using statistical tools like variance and standard deviation, and there are so many other tools available in the statistical measurements. And then costs involved with higher volatility can lead to bankruptcy when the risk is very high and the underlying cost is also very high. Phenomenal cost can lead toward bankruptcy. And when we have risk in all our transactions, particularly when we are talking of business, so uncertainty must be substituted with certainty. Any business person, any finance person wants to replace the uncertainty in the operations with certainty, even by paying a price. So that price, we know that is the insurance expense. And the objectives of risk management are to reduce volatility in the probable outcomes, to eliminate costly low tail outcomes. When the underlying cost is very huge, it may lead towards the bankruptcy. So we want to avoid that situation as well. And to maintain a certain risk profile, we want to maintain a calculated risk. We don't want it to go beyond that certain limit. And the objective of any firm or business is the value maximization. So by managing the risk, we can add value to the firm, or we can maximize the profits or the value of the firm. We can classify the risk into business risk and financial risk, as it is clear that business risk relates to uncertainty arising from the nature of firm's business. For example, decreased revenues, higher cost, high turnover, and these are the things which are particularly related to the business. But when we talk of financial risk, it relates to the movement in the financial market, which are sometimes beyond the control of the firm or the business. For example, the interest rates, economic conditions, the political situation, these things we may relate it towards the financial position, financial risk. And also we can categorize the risk into systematic and unsystematic risk. So systematic risk is associated with overall market which you cannot manage. It arises into the market. For example, the interest rate movement, exchange rate movement, and the inflation in the economy. Then the unsystematic risk is linked to the specific asset of the firm. So firm can manage this type of risk, that is the unsystematic risk. For example, if there is a strike in the operation from the labor, that can be managed. If you can negotiate well, if you can pay them well, you can avoid such situations. And if you look at this picture, the systematic risk, it is constant. Whatever measures you take, it will remain the same. And along the y-axis we have standard deviation of portfolio return, and then on the x-axis we have number of securities in the portfolio. Normally, when we increase the number of securities, when we invest into different types of securities, when we increase the portfolio, it means that we are reducing the risk, we are managing the risk. But still, the standard deviation from the return remains the same. So you can see in case of systematic risk, it remains the same. So factors such as changes in the nation's economy, tax reforms by the government, a change in the world's economic situation, or the exchange rate movement. So these things are beyond the control of the firm or the business. So whatever measures a firm or business can take, still these risks remain there, and you cannot decrease them or you cannot increase them. Whereas the unsystematic risk, when you can increase your portfolio investment, that is actually you are reducing the risk. For example, the standard deviation of returns can reduce if you can increase the portfolio. So number of securities, when you keep on increasing, it means you are actually reducing the unsystematic risk. So these risks, they can be managed. And the risks faced by financial institutions, they are different types. For example, the market risk. In market, the financial institutions, they are concerned with the interest rates, and they are that kind of benchmark we have in Pakistan, KIBOR, Karachi Interbank Offer Rate. And then the equity price risk, the share price where the investments have been made by the financial institutions, it may vary. And then assets or commodity price risk, all those avenues where the financial institutions, they can make their investments. So from there, interest income or the price appreciation or the dividend income, they are the sources of income. So with the changes in the interest rates or the decrease in the prices, will have a risk for the financial institutions that their earnings will be reduced. And also the the currency risk, that is the exchange rate movement, will also determine the level of risk or the level of earning for the financial institution. And there are credit risk, that is trade credit risk. If there are some sales and purchases, the creditors may not pay on time. So these are the risks. And the counterparty risk, the other party involved into the contract might go default. So these risks are always there. And then we have liquidity risk. Funding liquidity risk is the ability to settle obligations immediately when they fall due. Liquidity risk means actually that when you want to sell your securities, you should be able to sell that. But if you are unable to sell them when you want to sell them, this is a liquidity risk. And there are trading liquidity risk as well in the market. And the operational risks, these are related to the operations of the financial institution, like the people's risk, maybe the employees turnover. You have trained employees with you and they shift their job from your bank to some other bank, or from one financial institution to another financial institution. Then technological risk, it means the rapidly changing technologies, there is a threat. The institutions, they can deploy or they can introduce the latest technologies, they can earn higher, and those institutions which are using the depleted technologies or overdated technologies, they need to update them, and this outdated technology can pose a threat as well. And the process risk, because certain processes, they go obsolete with the time in this innovative time. And the legal and regulatory risk, because the governments, they are changing. Even if even during their tenure, the governments, they might be changing their legal and regulatory requirements for the businesses. So when we talk of risk for the financial institutions, the risk in the conventional financial institutions and risk in the Islamic financial institutions, it is different. So the nature of risk in Islamic financial institution is unique because the nature of risk changes over time. For example, in the beginning of the transaction, during the transaction, and at the end of the transaction. It may be a credit risk, it may be a market risk, it may be a counterparty risk. So these risks are there even in one transaction at different stages. So let's see what are the unique nature of the risk in Islamic banks. First of all, the contractual nature of the deposits. The profit sharing investment account on the basis of Mudarba contracts, for example, and then demand deposits, which is known as Qarz Hasana. So the nature of deposits is different in Islamic banks and in conventional financial institutions. In Islamic financial institutions, the depositors, they are the investors into any business activity. So this is totally different concept from that of the conventional financial institution. So, and the relationship between the depositors and the Islamic financial institution is kind of Rabbul Mal and the Mudarib, that is the capital provider and the manager or the entrepreneur. So this is a different kind of relationship. And then the demand deposits, they are Qarz Hasana, and at any time the depositor wants to withdraw, they have to be paid back. But these accounts, they don't have any earnings on them because the banks, they can't invest them, or even if they are investing the surplus balances, but still they have to produce them at the time of demand, and these accounts will not earn anything, rather of service charges may be introduced in such accounts. And then there is fiduciary risk, which is profit sharing investment accounts or fiduciary contracts, because this is a trust between the depositor and the bank, and the low rate of return then the conventional banks or non-compliance with Sharia can be interpreted as breach of contract, which is a fiduciary risk, because this is a trust from the depositors on the Islamic financial institutions, and the depositors, they believe that their deposits will be treated according to the Sharia requirements. So if they are not treated according to the Sharia requirements, then this is a breach of trust. And on the other hand, there will be some depositors who will think that their deposits, they are earning less than the conventional deposits. So in that case, there might be a breach of trust. They may feel hurt. And the lower returns may lead to withdrawal of deposits. So when the returns are lower and even lower than the conventional banks, although it should be out of the profits, banks may not be earning that high profits, but still the risk is there that people, they might withdraw their deposits. Instead of depositing into Islamic financial institutions, they might start their own businesses. So this is a kind of risk for the Islamic financial institutions. And to avoid such situations, returns from shareholders are transferred to depositors, and this is transfer of risk associated with deposits to equity shareholders. And sometimes Islamic financial institutions, they don't pay dividends to their shareholders, rather to accommodate their depositors, to pay them a higher rate of return than actually it was earned. So they will transfer the balances from the dividend accounts into the returns for the depositors. So actually they are shifting risk from the depositors to the shareholders. So when the shareholders, they think that they are not getting enough dividends, they might sell the shares and they will invest somewhere else. And there is the fourth risk is that using profit sharing investment account as capital. So difference between restricted and unrestricted profit sharing investment accounts. So when there is a relationship of capital provider and the manager, so we have studied that there are restricted mudarbas and there are unrestricted mudarbas. So in that case, there might be some restrictions. And then risk in Islamic financial instruments, because the Islamic financial instruments, they are asset based or asset backed. So as modes are asset backed or equity based, market risk are important along with credit risk. So the value of the asset, which is the underlying subject of that instrument, so that value can lose its value. For example, if the underlying asset is a property and the property's market value goes down than its book value, so this is also kind of risk. And if the deposits have been invested into some equity stocks and the price of those stocks goes down, this is also a kind of risk. And the market and credit risk intermingle and transform from one kind to another at different stages of the transaction. And during the transaction of the Islamic financial institutions, the risk changes its nature, as I explained earlier, sometimes credit risk, sometimes market risk, and sometimes the counterparty risk. And there are operational risks that it can be related to the persons, lack of qualified human resources who understand or manage risks in Islamic banking. So the human resources may not be that much qualified that they can manage the risk, and there are technology risks always there, and legal risks are always there. So these are the risks which are same as that of the conventional banks. And the risk in Islamic financial instruments, as I explained earlier, that the risk for Islamic financial instruments is different at different stages. It may be credit risk, then it converts to market risk, and then it may be a counterparty risk. So if you see, it changes with the type of the wealth as well. If there is cash and cash has been received on the spot, there is no risk. Or when the payments have been received which were due, there is no risk. And if they are going to be received in future, there is credit risk. And this is same as in the case of conventional banks as well. But when it is asset, when the underlying transaction is an asset based, so in this case, when the Islamic financial institutions, they purchase the asset to deliver it to their clients, there is a market risk, because when the asset is in the possession of the Islamic bank, this is a market risk. And when the asset is transferred to the client, then there is a credit risk, or when the asset is received back in the case of lease contract, then again there is a market risk. So let's see what are the risk profiles of Murabaha. First, these are the financial instruments. The modes of financing are financial instruments, they are the same thing. So when Murabaha is a non-binding, then it means, let me explain you first of all what is Murabaha. Murabaha is a sale contract between the client and the Islamic financial institution, where Islamic financial institution purchases the asset for the client and adds its profit into all the costs, and all these costs and profits, they are known to the customer or the client, and that price has to be paid by the client either lump sum or on installment basis. So in the beginning of the transaction, Islamic financial institution purchases the asset for the client, so there is a market risk. So when the asset is in the possession of the bank, then this is a market risk. This is a market risk because the asset is with the bank, and this is not sure that client will take the possession of this asset or not, because this is a non-binding Murabaha. In non-binding, it is not binding on the client to receive that asset. So this is a market risk. But when the client takes the possession, it means the price will be due from the client. There is a credit risk. Now the client has to pay the price in installments. So those installments, they are the credit risk. Client may not pay on time, or client even go default. So these are the credit risks. And when at the end all the payments are received, then there is no risk. And in case of binding Murabaha, it means Islamic financial institution will make sure that whatever asset is purchased for the client must take possession of that asset. So in this case, there is no risk, because the bank will purchase it and client will take it. But during the transaction period, the installments are due from the client, so this is a credit risk. And when the Islamic financial institution receives all the installments, then there is no risk. And when we come towards Ijara and Ijara wa Iqtina, which we can call it as Ijara Muntahiya bit Tamlik, but it sounds a little easier. But so in this case, in Ijara contract, it is same thing as that of Murabaha, that for the client an asset is purchased and it is forwarded to the client. In case of Murabaha, the ownership is transferred to the client right away, but in case of Ijara, the ownership will remain with the bank. But the client, while using the asset, will use the usufruct or will have the beneficial use of the asset and will pay the price which is called as rent. So Islamic financial institution purchases the asset for the client. This is a market risk because the asset is in the ownership of the bank and it will remain in the ownership of the bank throughout the transaction period. And when the asset is transferred to the client, now the rents are due from the client. This is a credit risk. And at the end, when the asset is still with the in the ownership of the bank, the lease contract expired. So in that case, again, there is a market risk. And if it is ijara wa iqtana or ijara muntahiya bitamlik, which ends up in an ownership of the client or any third party, so in that case, Islamic financial institution first of all purchases the asset, and being the owner, market risk is with the bank. And then when the rents are due, this is a credit risk. And at the end, because this is ijara wa iqtana, and it means lease contract and then a sale or maybe a gift to the client. In that case, asset is transferred, maybe gifted or sold, and there is no risk. Then risk profile of salam. So in salam, as you know, this is again a sale contract where the price is paid at the spot or at the time of contract, but the asset, which is the subject matter or the commodity, will be received after the time period, and that time period is fixed. So in the beginning, price is paid. So throughout the contract period, there is a credit risk. As you can see, goods are due and price has been paid, and during the transaction, this is a credit risk. When the Islamic financial institution receives the good, now it becomes the market risk, because the Islamic financial institution becomes owner of the assets or the commodities or the goods. In that case, now Islamic financial institution has to sell these goods, so there is a market risk. So all the risk available in the market, bank has to face that. And to manage this market risk, bank enters into a parallel salam contract. That is, when the parallel salam contract is signed between the bank, now bank becomes the seller of the goods, and maybe another bank or any other entity that becomes the buyer. So then again, price is paid at the spot, necessary cash comes back in hand and commits to sell the goods. When the goods will be received, that will be delivered to the third party. So there is no risk, because whatever price was paid in the salam contract, it has been received back in the parallel salam contract. Whereas the goods are due from the salam contract, it still remains the credit risk. And then Islamic financial institution receives the goods from the salam contract from the first party and then delivers it to the third party in the parallel salam contract. So there is no risk at all. And in case of istisna, which is a contract of sale again, where the price may be paid at the spot, or it may be delayed and paid in lump sum, or it may be paid in installments, or it may be associated with the stages of manufacture. In salam, the subject matter was a commodity which did not require manufacturing, but in case of istisna, the subject matter of the contract of the sale is a commodity which needs manufacturing. So here the client comes to the Islamic bank for a particular commodity that needs manufacturing, and Islamic financial institution is not an institution of manufacturing. So then Islamic financial institution will enter into contract with another party which is a manufacturer. So then in the first contract we call it istisna. The second contract, which is with the manufacturer and the bank, that is known as parallel istisna. So first of all, Islamic financial institution commits to manufacture the assets in the beginning of the transaction, and cost of production is the market risk, and the price due from the client is the credit risk. And when the Islamic financial institution delivers assets and receives cash, there is no risk. So in istisna contract, we assume that bank manufactures the good and delivers the good according to the contract. But practically bank cannot do so. So then bank enter into a parallel istisna contract. And Islamic financial institution commits to manufacture assets by entering into a contract with the subcontractor. Now the subcontractor is a manufacturer, and this is a contract between the bank and the third party, which is a manufacturer. Now the price is due from the first istisna contract because the bank is now paying the price to the manufacturer. And then seller delay in delivery not according to the specification, this is a counterparty risk. Now the manufacturer, if it doesn't manufacture the goods according to the required specification, in that case the first party, that is the buyer or the client in the istisna contract, may refuse to take the delivery of such kind of assets or such kind of goods. So in that case, this is a counterparty risk. Counterparty is the manufacturer, which is a subcontractor in this case. So this is a counterparty risk. And if the seller produces it up to the required specification, then seller delivers the asset. Islamic financial institution will receive the possession and then delivers it to the client, and then there is no risk. Then comes Mudarba and Musharaka, which are the participatory modes of financing, where Islamic financial institution enter into a partnership agreement with the client. So if it is a Musharaka contract, bank and the client both will contribute capital. And if it is a Mudarba contract, bank will provide the capital, being the Rabbul Mal, and the client will become manager or the entrepreneur. And in both cases, in Musharaka and Mudarba, a profit sharing ratio irrespective of the capital contribution will be determined. Suppose in Musharaka capital contribution is 50% each, but the profit sharing ratios can be 50% for each, or it may be 60% and 40%, or any ratio which is agreed between the partners. And in case of Mudarba, again, the profit sharing ratio can be anything, maybe 50% each. Although the Mudarib or the manager or the entrepreneur has not contributed even a single penny into this contract, but still they can have a greater share into this contract because they provide, the managers, they provide their human resources. And then when the losses are to be distributed, it will be distributed according to the capital contribution. So in case of Musharaka, if the capital contribution is 50% each, losses will be divided into 50% each. Whereas in case of Mudarba, where the capital contribution is 100% from the one party and 0% from the other party, so the loss will go towards the capital provider, that is the person who provided 100% of the capital. And what are the nature of risk in these contracts? In case of Mudarba, Islamic financial institution invests and buys non-voting share. And there is a complete freedom to the Mudarib or the manager to do the business or to involve into the operations of that business. And the Rabbul Mal, which is a capital provider, will not interfere into the operations of that business and doesn't have any voting rights. It cannot have any say, but it can monitor or it can observe the operations so that there is no negligence or any breach of contract. And during the transaction, profits, which may profit share or returns, they are due from the Mudarib. So it depends on the Mudarib now. So this is a counterparty risk. And at the end of the contract, if it is for a specific time period or if it is for a particular project, and at the end, the principal which was invested, now it is due. Now if it is received in cash, there is no risk. But if it is received in equity or in tangible assets, then there is a market risk. And in case of Musharaka, where the capital is contributed by both, the Islamic financial institution invests into that venture as a partner and has the voting rights as well. Now the Islamic financial institution can act as an agent because the partners, they have their parts, and as a partner, Islamic financial institution can also have their say into the operations of the business. Now the profits, which are profit share or the returns, they are due from the manager, and manager may be any of the partners. So again, there can be a counterparty risk. And at the end of this contract, if it is for a specific time period or for a specific venture, then if the principal amount is received in cash, there is no risk, but if it is received in tangible assets, then there will be a market risk. And the third mode of participatory financing is known as diminishing musharaka. Again, in diminishing musharaka, it is a simple musharaka contract, but with an extra promise from one of the partners that partner will purchase the share of the other partner. So the share of one partner will be reducing. So that's why we call it a diminishing musharaka. So Islamic financial institution, when make investment into such kind of contract or in such venture, they have their say into the operations of the business. Now they have the voting rights into it. And the profit share or returns are again due from the managing partner or from the client. So whoever is the managing partner, so then it is a counterparty risk. And at the end, during the transaction period, when the assets of the Islamic financial institution are purchased gradually by the client, so asset or equity is transferred to the client when the transaction is completed, then there is no risk. Now we come towards another important topic, which is known as takaful. So takaful, as you know, that this is the Islamic insurance, and the meaning of insurance is, let's get familiar with the insurance. Insurance provides the means for people to transfer the burden of uncertainty to the insurer for an agreed financial consideration called the premium. What we discussed risk in the previous revision of the previous lecture. Then to counter that risk, we have an arrangement of insurance or takaful, and the insurer promises to provide financial compensation to the insured should a specified loss occurs. So suppose if you want to insure your vehicle from any accident, so if unfortunately that accident takes place, so in that case the losses will be compensated by the insurer. So this option of insurance provides a mechanism to the people to transfer their risk to the insurance companies against a price which we call as a premium. So under the conventional system, we pay premiums to mitigate the risks involved into different operations or with different assets. If it is a business entity, they might have their fire insurances, they have their insurances for their efforts, for their assets, and they might have insurances for their workers as well. And the insurance, in fact, is an act of taking precautionary measures against possible danger or losses arising out of uncertain events. So you can see that uncertainty is never liked by the business people particularly. So they keep paying a price, and if the unexpected event or the loss or an accident doesn't occur, still they are paying the price. And insurance is something which is not forbidden in Islamic economic system. Muslim traders used to travel across the continents, and their voyages often faced troubles and incurred losses. And to protect from such possible losses, Arab traders used to insure their caravans in the 2nd century of Islamic era. And what they used to do was, all the participants into that caravan, they used to create a pool of fund, and all the people, they used to contribute a certain amount into that pool of fund. And if somebody faced any loss, the loss was compensated out of that pool of fund. So this practice has been practiced in the Islamic history as well. But there are certain objections against the present practice of the insurance companies. If you look into the operations of the insurance companies, they invest their surplus or whatever premiums they receive from the participants, they invest them into interest-bearing securities or interest-bearing deposits. Even if you look at the balance sheet or the financial statements of the State Life Insurance Corporation Pakistan, you will see the heads that interest income from securities investment, interest income from the deposits, interest income from the borrowings made to the employees or to the agents. So the scholars view the insurance contract as an exchange contract. Money is exchanged for money over a time period. The first objection against the conventional insurance system is that it is only an exchange of money without any consideration of the underlying transaction or any commodity or asset. So on one hand, the people, they pay premium, that is in cash, and if any loss occurs, then again they receive a cash. So this is an exchange of cash. Or even if it is not for a particular damage, if it is kind of, for example, a life insurance or other kind of insurances, where at the maturity of that insurance period, the rewards are paid back to the participants. So in that case, it is simply exchange of money. So just like any conventional banking system where the deposits are maintained, and those deposits, they earn interest income into it, and at the end a huge amount, including the principal amount plus interest amount or interest income, is paid back to the depositor. So again, it seems similar to that as well. And this brings about the problem of gharar, which is known as uncertainty, and which leads towards maisar, gambling, and in investment aspects there is riba. So all these elements are there which are not allowed under Islamic financial system. First of all, uncertainty. When you are not sure about anything, when, for example, if you want to purchase anything and you're not sure about all the features of that, better to avoid it, particularly if the investments are huge. And gambling, of course, is not allowed with the hope that I will pay a price and such event or loss will occur and I will get something back. And sometimes people, they become so desperate that they don't care and they even cross the moral limits and they arrange accidents. They arrange accidents by themselves just to claim the insurance money. And with the contributions which were deposited by the clients as premium, those amounts, they are used into the riba-based transactions. The insurance companies, they invest into riba-based transactions, and also the investment profit belongs to the company. So it is the owner of the company, insurance company, they are the shareholders and all the profits goes to them. But under the Islamic financial system, there is a difference. So we will see it later on. But let me show you the final profit and loss account of State Life Insurance Corporation, and this was the latest available for the year 2011. And you can see here investment income not attributable to statutory funds, return on government securities, which is interest income, and interest income on loans and advances to employees and agents, interest income on bank deposits. So you can see these are all derived from the interest income. And there may be some other incomes as well out of the real estate as well, but the main business of their deposits are the policies which they receive, the premiums they receive. They normally do the interest based transactions. Now, how we can replace the conventional insurance system with an Islamic insurance system, because insurance is very much necessary into our daily life and in our business operations. And for that purpose, Islamic scholars, they have introduced the concept of takaful, which you might call it as an Islamic insurance. And in Pakistan and all over the world, we have so many insurance companies which operate under the principles of Islamic Sharia, and we call them as takaful company. In Pakistan, we have Pak Qatar Takaful, we have Dawood Takaful. There are so many other companies, they are operating all over the world. And the word takaful has been derived from the word kafala, which means guaranteeing, जिसको हम उर्दू में कफालत करना भी कहते हैं. And the takaful means mutual protection and joint guarantee. It is a mutual act where so many people, they contribute into a pool of fund and they compensate the losses out of this pool of fund. And that pool of fund is utilized to compensate against any losses arising out of any accident or any natural calamity. And to replace the insurance system, that is the conventional insurance system in Pakistan's economy, we have a decision by the Council of Islamic Ideology of Pakistan stating that the contract of insurance in all its forms is unlawful, corrupt, false, prohibited, and promulgatable. So you can see that the severity of this concept, that it must be replaced with some Islamic principles. And the basic principle behind takaful is that fortunate many helping the unfortunate few, where only few unfortunate, which are the victims of any accident or maybe any disaster, so that those unfortunates must be helped by the unfortunate many. And these are the few features of takaful. Firstly, the participation into a takaful fund must be performed with utmost sincerity in order to help those faced with difficulties. So the objective here is not to earn any profits, but to help each other. And the underlying motive is ta'awanu alal birri wat taqwa wala ta'awanu alal ismi wal udwan, that we should cooperate among each other for the good things. And this is with that intention, that we participate into takaful operations with good intention, that is to help each other. And every policy holder would pay his or her subscription in order to assist those who need assistance. And any member or participant suffering a catastrophe or disaster would receive a certain sum of money or financial benefit from a fund as also defined in the pact to help him meet the loss or damage. and we have made it systematic. Nowadays, according to the level of contribution, you can compensate against your loss. If you are only ensuring a particular level of loss, then your contribution might be a little less. But if you want to insure against a huge loss, the contribution should be accordingly higher. And these are the basic elements of a takaful contract, that mutuality and cooperation, that is taking care of each other. And the takaful contract pertains to tabarru as against muadat, which is a contract of exchange. That is, in conventional insurance system, you simply pay cash in hoping cash back. And payments made with the intention of tabarru, that is to earn reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and eliminates the element of gharar, maisar and riba, because these contributions, they are kind of donations. So for donations we earn reward, and there is no concept of having gharar, uncertainty, or maisar, that is gambling, or concept of riba, because these funds, these pool of funds which are created out of takaful arrangements, they are not used for riba based transactions. And the management of the takaful companies, that is, they are known as the takaful operators, they have a relationship of a wakil or agent with that pool of fund which is created by the participants, or they can assume the role of mudarib. So there are different models which we call them wakala model, where the operators, they charge a fee, and it will be called a mudarba model when the operators, they charge a profit when they invest that pool of fund into different activities, business activities, and they derive profit from it, and that profit is shared between the takaful operator and that pool of fund. And as it is clear that takaful arrangement is a risk sharing arrangement instead of the risk transferring arrangement in case of conventional insurance system. In conventional insurance system, the participants pay a price, a premium, and the risk is transferred to the insurance company, whereas in case of takaful companies, the risk is shared among the contributors, among all the participants. And the constitution of separate participant or takaful fund or participant special account is there with the contributions by the participants in a takaful. A donation account or a waqf account, we may call it as a tabarru account, and we may call it as a participant's special account. And that account is constituted, and all the contributions which are contributed by the participants, they are deposited into that account. And the constitution of Sharia Supervisory Board, it is the basic requirement. It has been established by the State Bank of Pakistan, or maybe the SECP, Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan, and that in pool of fund will be invested into Sharia compliant business. And the main drivers of takaful are the piety, that is the individual's purification without having any intention to get unnecessary benefits, and the brotherhood, that is to assist each other, and charity, whatever you contribute into that pool of fund is a charity, and mutual guarantee, you share the risk of each other, and community well-being as opposed to profit maximization. So here the objectives are totally different than that of a conventional insurance system. And these are the different models, what we call as wakala model. In a wakala model, a fee is charged by the takaful operator. So all the contributions that are received by the participants, if they are divided into wakala fee, and the balance goes to the tabarru contribution. So suppose the wakala fee is 30%, 70% will be into the tabarru contribution or into the participant's special account. So this will constitute the general takaful fund. And this general takaful fund will be invested into some businesses, investments will be made, and then profits or losses will be the outcome of this investment. So if it is profit, it will go into the same general fund, and if it is a loss, again it will be out of this general takaful fund. And this general takaful fund will keep on increasing with the profits. All the profits that are earned, they will make part of this general takaful fund. So, and what is deducted out of it is the expenses related to the general takaful fund, and the claims if there is any loss or damage occurs, so that losses or damages will be compensated out of this fund. And then there are re-takaful arrangements. Just like the insurance companies, they have their reinsurance. So just to make sure that all claims are satisfied, insurance companies, they will make such arrangements. They will also insure themselves as well. So there are arrangements of re-takaful, so that expenses are also paid out of this general takaful fund. And in case of cancellation, any expenses related to that will also be deducted from this account, and then reserves will be maintained out of it. A certain level of reserve will be maintained, and if after that reserve something is left, that is known as net surplus. So now that net surplus can be treated differently. It may be gifted back to the participants, or whatever way the takaful companies deems fit. It may be donated to some other charitable purpose, and it might be used in case of disasters, and whatever way the takaful operator deems necessary or fit. Whereas the wakala fee, after deducting the managerial expenses, the profits will become the share of the shareholder, that is the owner of that takaful operator company. And one thing you need to keep in mind, that this whole arrangement, the ownership is with the takaful contributors. Whereas in case of insurance companies, the shareholders of insurance companies, they are the owners of those insurance companies. And here, the participants are the owners of all these assets and these processes. And in case of Mudarba model, the takaful operators, they not only provide the services of a takaful operations, but also they manage the funds on Mudarba basis. And they not only manage the tabarru funds, but they also invite some other funds, just like in the case of participants account. All the contributions received by the participants, they are again divided into two parts, but in this case not into wakala fee, but into participants special account and into participants personal account. So these two accounts, they are maintained. So participants account, which is participants personal account, it is treated just like any deposit account into any Islamic financial institution or any bank. So the treatment is different. So this account is maintained just like any deposit account. There will be withdrawals at any time. In case of death of the participant, all the balance belongs to that descendants of that person. And in case a policy is surrendered, still any balance available into this account belongs to that person. And at the time of maturity of that policy, all the balance again belongs to the depositor. So here, with these two funds, investments are made. With these funds, takaful operator, they make investment, and with these investments, profits are derived or losses are the outcome. So if there are profits, then there is a profit sharing ratio. Suppose 30% profit goes to the takaful operator and 70% goes to the fund. So in this case, you can see the profits, they are derived, and 30% of the profit goes to the takaful operator and 70% profit goes back to this account. And it doesn't go only into participants account, but it goes to the participant special account as well, according to their proportion. If this is 60% and this is 40%, then that profit which is derived, suppose this is 1000, so out of this 1000, 60% or 600 will come into this account, and 40%, which is 400, will come into participant special account. And the deductions, just like in the previous model, it is same as from the participant special account, that is the claims, re-takaful expenses or other expenses which can be attributed to this account, and then the reserves will be maintained. And if after maintaining the reserves, still something is left, that we know as net surplus. That net surplus will be payable to the participants, or according to the agreement between the participants and the takaful operators. So this is known as Mudarba model. But now there is another model which we call it a hybrid model, which is the hybrid of wakala model and Mudarba model. So in this case, we have made the flow chart a little differently. So the contributions, they are divided into participants special account, which is a tabarru account, and participants account, which is the personal account. So the Wakala fee is deducted from this participant's special account and it goes to the Takaful operators or the shareholders of that Takaful operating company. And the investments are made out of these funds. And the Takaful operators, they manage these funds. So being the manager or Mudarib, they will have their profit. So all these funds, they are invested and profits, they are generated. So if there is any income, it will be distributed in all the partners, that is the operator, the participant's account and the participant's special account. And then it will be treated just like the personal deposit account. The deductions out of it, it belongs to the participants. And in case of participant special account, it will be treated same as in the case of Wakala and Mudarba model. It will have claims, it will have Kafal expenses and any expense which can be attributable to these things. And a reserve account will also be managed. And if something is left, that is a net surplus, that will be again deposited into the participant special account. And there may be some other arrangements. It depends upon the agreement between the Takaful operator and the participants. Now, I have tried to make these three models in its simplest form. If you look on the Google, or you might see some other literature where these contracts, they are not designed like this. These are the simplest forms just to make you aware or to make you familiar with the operations of these Takaful models. So, but when you come to know this idea that what is Wakala model, what is Mudarba model, and what is a hybrid model, then you will be able to understand the complex models which are designed by these Takaful companies. So these are the basic ideas of different models, but it can be made complex with the agreement of the Takaful operators and the participants. And the last topic that we discussed in this course, it was the evolution of Islamic banking in Pakistan. And it was interesting to see that Islamic banking started in Pakistan, and it was quite a half-hearted attempt, or the reluctance of the governments could be observed in all these operations. So if we look at the history, Council of Islamic Ideology, the Islami Nazariyati Council, was appointed the task to prepare a draft of interest-free economy in 1977, and in February 79, President of Pakistan announced that interest will be removed from the economy in a period of 3 years. And for this purpose, at that time, 3 organizations or firms were selected. That was the House Building Finance Corporation, National Investment Trust, and Mutual Fund Investment. And the idea was to clean the operations of these companies from the riba-based transactions. And at that time, Council of Islamic Ideology suggested to decrease the dependence on the foreign loans, because the foreign loans, they have the element of riba, and you can't get these loans as Qarz-e Hasana from the loaning countries, from the foreign countries, and also you can't get Qarz-e Hasana, and also you can't get these loans on profit and loss sharing basis. So the dependence on the foreign loans was advised to be reduced. And in 1981, government ordered banks to establish separate counters for deposits on profit and loss sharing basis. And in 1981, separate counters were established into the banks where the people could deposit into the bank accounts based on profit and loss sharing, not to earn interest. And then government announced the discontinuation of the parallel system from July 1985. Until July 1985, almost 4 years, this practice continued, and then it was discontinued by the government. And the movement towards the interest-free economy suffered a setback in August 1985, when the government allowed the banks to invest the profit and loss sharing deposits to be invested into interest-bearing securities. So it means that I invested or I deposited with the bank in a profit and loss sharing account, but with my deposit, the bank was allowed to make investment into interest-bearing accounts or interest-bearing investments. For example, in bonds or in government securities, where the interest income was derived and it was distributed among the profit and loss sharing holders. So this was quite a setback, and this showed that government is not sincere in promoting or in extending the operations of the Islamic financial system. And in 1985, Federal Sharia Council declared the procedure adopted by the banks in 1985 as un-Islamic, because when the banks were allowed to invest into interest-bearing securities, at that time, that operation, that action of the banks was declared un-Islamic by the Federal Sharia Council. And in response, the government and some banks, they made appeal to the Sharia appellate bench of the Supreme Court, and in 1999, a decision came, and all the appeals, they were rejected, and then the government was advised to convert the system into an Islamic system. So then the government started setting up high-level commissions, task force, some committees to institute and promote Islamic banking on a parallel basis with the conventional banking system. Now there are so many committees and some processes are going on to convert the system to Islamize the economy, and this is very slow process, and it is going on parallel basis. And some steps have been taken by the State Bank of Pakistan as well. In 2004, the State Bank of Pakistan established a dedicated Islamic banking department and established a Sharia board to regulate and approve guidelines for the emerging Islamic banking industry. So that attempts are going on, and these two systems, they are going parallel to each other, and there are so many misconceptions what we have discussed in our previous lectures, that the operations, although they are going separately, but still they are the perception is that they are the same operations, although the terminology is different. And these are the Islamic banks operating in Pakistan. At the moment, we have 5 banks with 668 branches operating all over Pakistan, and these are the conventional banks which were, according to the instructions of State Bank of Pakistan, they have to operate their Islamic banks or Islamic bank branches as well. So they have this much Islamic banks, banking branches in Pakistan, about 379. And then there are sub-branches operated by different banks. The Islamic sub-branches operated by almost 6 banks. They are 68 branches. In total, we have 1,115 Islamic banking branches until June 30th, 2013. And this is the spread of Islamic banking branches in Pakistan. And you can observe, as we mentioned in our previous lecture as well, the concentration of Islamic banking branches, they are only in big cities, whereas the small cities, they don't have much branches. And in the countryside, we don't see any presence of the Islamic financial institutions. That means they are only targeting the areas where the commercial activities, the trade activities are higher, and they don't want to invest in a participatory modes, maybe with the farmers or the people with some high risk, and they don't assume a very high risk. And you can observe in these lists that the concentration of Islamic banks, it is normally in the big cities, and they don't invest into those areas where the risks might be higher. And if you look into their financing mix, we saw that in their Murabha, Ijara and diminishing Musharaka, it had more than about 80% of their investment. Whereas the participatory modes, which is the main spirit of any Islamic literature, that is the Musharaka and Mudarba. So in these modes, Islamic banks, they have a very little investment, less than maybe 3% or about 2%. And then this shows the spirit that what they want to target into the economy. And I would personally, I think that Islamic banks, they should keep their investments into participatory modes as well, and they should bring it to some reasonable level, maybe not 100%, but about 30 to 40 or to 50% initially. So this is all about this course. We studied about 18, 19 topics into different lectures. And I will remind you that in the first lecture, that is actually the second lecture about the characteristics of Islamic economic system, it is all derived from Quran and Hadith. And when you want to quote any verse or any Hadith into your exams, be sure that you quote it exactly. If you are not sure about that, don't quote it. And I would prefer that you don't quote those verses or Hadith, and you will not be asked anything out of that first lecture, that is in fact the characteristics of Islamic economic system. And we studied it in the second lecture after the overview of the the introductory lecture of the course, and out of that you will not be asked any question, but it is necessary to make up your mind to understand what is the topic, what is the importance of this topic, and why should we understand it. And I will advise you not to take these courses just to earn some higher grades, but to make your understanding clear about the topics. This is very much important. We are living in the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, and this is our responsibility that we have a system which is according to the Islamic instructions or the divine guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is all from my side. I hope best of luck for you all, and maybe in future we'll see each other. Assalamu alaikum.